Hello, my name is Lindsey Owensby, and I am here today to talk about my Mile 700 capstone project. And the title of my project is The Effects of Test Optional Admissions on Minority Students. This research project was conducted on Drury University. So before we actually dive into the project itself, we need to look at a history of test optional policies to better understand what exactly a test optional policy is. So in 1969, Bowdoin College became the first in the United States to not require the submission of a standardized test score such as the ACT or SAT. Fast forward 30 years, and test optional admissions become the new norm in society. As heightened awareness of racial undertones and standardized tests, more students have elected to be reviewed off an essay and/or interview. In 2020, during the height of the global pandemic, many Ivy League schools adopted a test optional admission policy as well. This was seen as a huge step forward in racial equality at these prestigious schools. It is worth noting at the time of this research project, many Ivy Leagues in 2024 have decided to go back to requiring the submission of a standardized test. So let's look at Drury. Drury University is a small private liberal arts college located in the heart of Springfield, Missouri. In 2020, the university adopted their own test optional policy where a student would no longer need to submit a test score. Instead, they could submit an essay. Drury's leadership team hoped that this would bring in more students as it correlated with the launching of their fusion curriculum. Now on to my research question. Now that 4 years have passed since Drury adopted a test optional admission policy, staff and faculty want to know the effects it has had on the institution. Has adopting a test optional policy helped or hindered the institution's academic profile? Would we have gotten these students without adopting a test optional policy? Now, this research project actually takes those questions a step further and asks, what are the effects of minority students who are test optional? So before we dive into any of our research, we have to define our terms. So throughout this report, common terms will be utilized such as start term, which is the term in which the student will enroll in, Ginzabar ID, the number in which a student is identified at Drury. First generation indicates if a student is the first in their family to attend college. Current grade point average is their grade point average at Drury currently. High school grade point average is their cumulative high school grade point average throughout high school. Essay score, if applicable, is the student's essay score that was submitted. And a test score, if applicable again, is the student's standardized test score if submitted. Now, there have been many articles written about the pros and cons of a test optional admissions policy for nearly 15 years, I would say. I did a quick Google search, and a lot of these articles seem to be from about 2019 to now, which correlates with the Ivy League schools adopting test optional policies as well. I did want to note a few articles, such as The Most Revealing Show, Test Optional College Admission Policies, the Pros and Cons, and then Meteorocracy Dismissed. So each of these articles argue one side or the other. Some say that a test optional admission policy is the way to go, that it erases any biases and or racial undertones due to the new affirmative action ruling that was handed down from the Supreme Court. Whereas others argue that standardized tests are actually the only way that counselors can gauge a student's readiness for college. Methodology. So a research project like this one heavily relies on data. The methodology for this project is that of a quantitative design. The data instrument used was a document analysis. There were 2 samples analyzed and then broken down into 6 subsamples. There was a 5-step process in the analyzing of this data, such as formulating the data, gathering the data, analyzing the data, reviewing the data, and then writing down my recommendations. Here is a quick look into the logic that went behind pulling the reports needed to be able to analyze this data. So as you can see, there is a picture that says student division degree in advising, and that is actually a look into Genzabar, which is Jury's student information system. And then you can see Slate, which is Jury's current CRM system. And then the photo below is Jury's old CRM system, Salesforce. All right, so let's get into the fun stuff, the results. So this first slide is going to be the test optional minority student results. Now this is broken up into two categories: first year test optional versus second year and above test optional. As you can see, after just 1 year at Drury University, the students' current GPA average is 2.51, whereas after 2 years and above, the students' current GPA average is 2.99. 33% self-identified as first generation, whereas another 14% self-identified as first generation for second year and above. For first year students, 85% of students changed their major from when they applied versus 59% for second year and above. Now, I know this is a very common practice in higher education to change your major after you get to college because nobody truly knows what they want to do going into their freshman year. And the 85% really shocked me to my core, to be honest. It just seems such a major drastic from the 59%. Uh, what this is telling me is that more people are coming to college maybe unprepared. And then 24 was the average essay score given for these students on both for first year test optional and second year test optional. So then let's look at the test pathway for minority students. So a test pathway means that a student submitted their standardized test scores. And so after just 1 year at Drury University, the student's current GPA average is 3.37, whereas the second year and above, current GPA average is 3.53. Significantly better than SS optional students. 26% of first year test pathway students identified as first gen compared to 8% self-identified second year and above. Now, I will say that that data point might not be 100% accurate since Drury's old CRM system did not require the collection of first generation students. For these first year test pathway students, 40% changed their major from when they applied versus 77% of second year and above. And the one thing that really stood out to me again was the changing their majors, but it was interesting to me that 77% after their second year decided to change their major, which was just astronomical to me. Again, 24 was the average essay score for both of these sample sets. So now let's look at the majority population. A majority student is a student that identifies as white, whereas a minority student is anyone other than white. So for a first year test optional student, their average GPA is 2.93, whereas a second year and above GPA average is 2.66. Now these are pretty low numbers, just like the test optional minority student results. As you can see, 2.51, 2.99. For first year test optional majority students, 33% self-identified as first generation compared to 16% self-identified as first generation. 94% of students changed their major from when they applied. First year test optional majority students. That was insane to me. Compared to 59% of students changed their major from when they applied for second year and above. And then again, 24 was the average essay score given for these students. So let's analyze this. The data was analyzed using a series of pivot tables and then cross-referenced with each subsample. The data is telling me that minority students who choose the test optional pathway tend to do poorer than minority students who choose the test pathway. A common denominator between all sample sets was that the essay score average remained the same. There can be three interpretations to this data. Number one would be not enough training went into training admissions counselors on grading essays, as the average for each subsample was 24. Number two would be over half of the test optional students were identified as athletes. Historically, athletes have been given special consideration at times. And then finally, an essay is not a strong predictor of a student's success in college. So to sum this all up, the goal of this research project was to measure the success rates of test optional minority students at Drury University. Over the course of 2 months, data was taken from 3 systems that Drury utilizes to store enrollment data. And those systems were Genzabar, their student information system, Salesforce, our old customer relationship management system, and Slate, their current customer relationship management system. Various pivot tables were ran between 6 sub-sample sets. This leads me to my recommendations. Train admissions counselors on proper grading of college readiness essays. Don't just give a student a 24 in order to get them to the next scholarship bracket. And yes, that does happen. Number 2 would be to facilitate relationships with high school counselors in rural and urban areas. We actually have an associate director of admission whose sole job is to do that. He started in October of 2023, and he has done a really good job at forming these relationships. We just have to cultivate these relationships now. Number 3 would be to create resources for test optional students. Now, what I'm meaning with this would be create a handbook to give to students when we're at college fairs or on high school visits that are like tips and tricks of how to write an essay, or host essay writing workshops in our main territory areas such as Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, Dallas. And finally, Drury needs to stick with their admission guidelines and not make as many exceptions for athletes. There will always be exceptions. However, this seems to be an increasing issue with athletic coaches encouraging students to submit an essay in hopes that they will get admitted rather than their test scores. And this is a real thing too. This happens so many times throughout the year that coaches want a student very badly, but the students' grades aren't there. And so they have them submit an essay instead of a test score. And then we end up getting their test scores later on after they were admitted, and they are well below average. So thank you so much for listening to my Mile 700 capstone project. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I had a lot of fun making this project. Thank you.